When you look out to the horizon, what do you see? What does tomorrow look like? If you run a family-owned business, you see the future differently. As part of the fourth generation of my family to help lead First Bank, I know we see the future like you. At the First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses, your vision is ours. Now, let our experience be yours. In this seminar, let us help you see what your future can be.
Good morning. Family offices can run the gamut from writing checks and being the bookkeeper for the family and the individual, or they can flash forward and be the investment vehicle for the family as well. So today you're here, and I hope you can cover the gamut and differentiate between different levels of family office service. So without further ado, Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Joe. Truly appreciate being here. Welcome, everybody. So we're going to focus on a few things around family offices, why family offices exist, some of the types of family offices there are, challenges faced by family offices, and hopefully show you kind of an idea. So we need to start with some statistics onto why family offices exist, and it starts with the single biggest one. And in the old days, we used to say shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And what studies have shown to prove that out, both longitudinal and deep studies throughout the world, 70% of families fail to get their wealth through or to or through the 3rd generation. And given that it's a worldwide phenomenon, not just a U.S. issue, it's basically a human condition. It's a family condition. Let's start with some families don't care if they pass wealth through generations. That's not important to them. They don't want to do that. I ran into one fellow by the name of Ravi. He told me, look, I don't want to deal with the CPAs, attorneys, with all of this stuff. He's worth between 20 and 30 million. And he said, I don't want to deal with all that. He said, my goal in life is, here's what I did. I have 2 children. I bought them each a $10 million life insurance policy. When I die, that's enough for them. So my job is, before I die, if I die with $1.25 in my pocket, I have failed. So so some people just don't want to do it. But I will tell you, most families care about their wealth through generations. They care about their legacy. They care about, those grandchildren, or, because they worked so hard and took risks and did all these things in their family business that they want that legacy. So we're going to be talking about those that want the legacy. Now, the reality is that this failure rate happens for a couple overarching reasons from my perspective. One is families simply don't know how to do it. They don't understand all the dynamics of it. They understand how to run their business because that's what basically has created their wealth over time. And so they know how to do that. But when it comes to, as you sell your business, now you've made a transition, what does that look like? How do you manage that? How do you manage the families through all that? The second big overarching reason is my experience is some families just aren't willing to do the hard work to make it happen. The reality is, to get wealth through generations, to have a successful family and successful family office is really hard work. And so that's why there's a 70% failure rate. I mean, it's just difficult. Let's talk about why that failure rate exists. 80%. So let's talk about 80% of that failure rate is because of several issues. One, the lack of the right kind of communications within the family. Let's acknowledge that what we have is families. I've talked to families that say, look, we have Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas, we spend a lot of time together, we do our annual vacations together. We have a lot of communication going on. The challenge is that's not the level of communication you need to have if you're really looking towards having a legacy of your wealth. And so when you start asking them, do you actually talk about money? No, I don't talk about money. Do they know how much you're worth? wealth you have? No, they don't know how much wealth they have. And that can cause some real difficulties. And I'm going to share some stories just to kind of bring the points home. I talked to one family that owned a very successful business, had two daughters outside the business, one son that ran the business and was going to need to run the business because of the way the distribution agreements and everything were. And he finally agreed to sit down to have a family meeting and really talk about the wealth and talk about what things look like. I talked to one family, and when you talked to the daughters understood that the son was going to run the business, which was the creator of the wealth. They understood that. Here was their question, and no one had raised this in the family before. If he's running the business, does that make him the patriarch of the family if mom and dad are gone? And if he's the patriarch, does that make the wife the matriarch? Does she now basically run the family? And the challenge was they didn't like her. They didn't think they didn't think they would like that at all. So that was setting up a dynamic. Had the parents passed away without addressing these dynamics, that family was not going to hold together. That was going to be basically a disaster. So they were able to start that dialogue and start really having true conversations around the wealth. Number two would be the lack of good family governance processes. You know, when you're transitioning from running your family business, where you know how to pull all the levers of, keeping it successful, hiring the right people, all those kinds of things. When you go and transfer what I call from the family business to the business of family, how are you doing that? What makes sense around that? Just one good example, are you just going to hand the kids money? Or do they have to get an education? What are the things around the family that are going to be really important for the family? For instance, families that hold together, and I'll say this several times probably during this conversation, families that stay together and hold the wealth together last longer. They last through generations. And one of the challenges is keeping the children, quite honestly, engaged. And as the generations change, they have different views about what wealth is and what makes sense there. And so how do you prepare the next generations to handle the wealth and handle your legacy? So that brings you to the third issue around this 80% failure, is the failure to properly prepare heirs. For instance, one question comes up all the time. When is the right time to let your children know about the wealth? When's the right time to start having these conversations? My belief, and what I've seen successful, is that it's never too early or never too late, but it's how you do it. You have to be age appropriate, and you have to there's some good techniques about developing the communications with the children, having them know how to work together, how to make decisions together. There's a lot of issues around this family wealth and legacy. Finally, and it's a big one, and it's not always easy to develop right out of the box, but what's the purpose of the wealth? The more you have a purpose, the more you have a reason to rally the family and galvanize the family around your purpose, more likely the family's going to hold together, the more likely you're going to keep the wealth together, the more likely you're going to have your wealth, your legacy go through generations. Now, so that's basically 80%. 15% of the reason for this failure is basically not treating your family, like your family office, not treating your call it wealth like a family enterprise. And by that I mean families lack structure. They have a business and they have management, they have meetings, they have a budget, they do all these kinds of things in their business, but when we'll call it go liquid, all of that goes away. And so a lot of times, lack of understanding where your wealth is, how fast you're spending it, lack of good reporting, lack of internal controls. There's a lot of issues around risk mitigation, etc., that in a family enterprise, so this idea of going from a family business to a family enterprise is really important, and it's really important to have good governance around that. So that's 15% of the failure. People just don't know what they're doing in terms of that. For instance, who convenes meetings with your insurance? I ran across one family where it came out of a divorce. And it turned out to be the woman that she ended up with a ton of money. But the problem is she had never dealt with all of the issues around insurance, the real estate, etc. And when we took a look at what she was doing, turns out her cars weren't insured. She wasn't named on a lot of these real estate. There's a lot of stuff that was just a mess. But who's going to take care of that? And if something had happened, she might have been really stung hard by some liabilities that she didn't know that she was subject to. So there's just a lot of things to think about when it comes to this family enterprise thinking. We'll talk about internal controls in a minute. 5% of the failure, so that leaves us with 5%. 5% of the failure comes from wealth managers, lawyers, CPAs, bankers, everybody not doing a good job for you. So it's only 5%, but 5% can be a failure. The way I look at it, I think that means everybody's doing a great job. And I would highly recommend you access Joe Ambrose at Hart, your relationships at First Bank, because quite frankly, they're doing a good job for you, and they care about what happens to your family and your business and your children. So that 5%, I'm glad to see it's 5% because I'm on that. I'm a CPA, so I have that kind of background. Let's stop for a second. Say, okay, there's that 70% failure rate. What's the good? Is there any good news, Tom? Is there any good news? The good news is this: there's a 30% success rate. Families have successfully moved wealth through generations. And as I said, the studies show that the more you can keep the family together and the wealth consolidated, the longer the family will have wealth and the bigger impact you can make in your family, your community, and if you care, the world at large. And there's a saying out there, and I really subscribe to it: wealth is more than just money. Wealth is impact. Wealth is freedom to make a difference. So if you hold that wealth together over time, you'll be able to have all of those elements, if you would. So why the family office? Well, family offices are one of the fastest growing entities or organizations in the past 10 to 15 years. They've just blown up. They just burgeoned. And the reason for that, and simply stated, is family offices are really designed, or should be designed, around that 30% success rate. Part of family offices are to help create and take advantage of those best practices that come out of the 30% success. And there's a lot of consultants around. There's a lot of ways that you can access this information on how to do that. But that's why family offices exist. You can go back to the mid-1700s and you've got the Rothschilds. That was a family-owned business and basically a family-level enterprise that lasted for, I think, 200 years. Look at the royal family in Britain. That's a family office. If you boil it all down, it's a family office with a great big purpose for the country. So, and that's lasted for years. More wealth allows for more diversification, allows for more risk-taking, allows for supporting different ideas of how the family wants to comport themselves, and for a change in purpose over time. So that's why family office exists. Let's talk about types of family offices. So there's a saying, and it's absolutely true in my experience: if you know one family office, you know one family office. Because every family office has the elements of who the patriarch is, who the matriarch is, how the wealth was made, how long you've had the wealth, what's important to the family. So they're very, very different. What stage of development are you in? What stage of generations are you in? So family offices are very, very different because the family office is designed around the needs of the family and the needs of where the family is. So let's start with the most basic, and that is an embedded family office. Families have their family businesses. Oftentimes they have an individual that will be maybe starting to do the bookkeeping for the family. And then that expands out to, hey, you know, we own this little business over here. I need some help managing that. So what happens is you start getting this embedded family office. You don't even realize sometimes that that's what you've created. But it exists, and it is, let me do this one thing here. Trying to make sure I keep to time here. And so you have the embedded family office, and when you sell your company, usually that all goes away. You don't have that. So that's kind of the start of it. Then you have something called the concierge family office. So you've sold your company, and you just want to live your life. You need somebody to, you know, you're going to travel for the next 5 years, and so you need somebody to do all your concierge stuff, make sure that house is taken care of while you're gone, make sure that you get travel arrangements, etc. So that's a family office. Then you have, and maybe they would do some bill pay, handle some expenses, etc. Then there's a family office, we'll call it an administrative family office. Very strong in bill pay, cash management, financial reporting, maintaining the technology that underpins the family office, all the things needed to make sure that the family and the generations are taken care of. And so you might just stop there because maybe you've got completely everything else done separately. Now you could also then have an investment family office. An investment family office is one that manages the investments, and the more complex the investments, the more you're going to need an investment family office. Keep in mind, almost everything I'm talking about here can be outsourced and is outsourced, and we'll talk about a multifamily office in a minute. But for the single family offices for your own, it can be literally just a one individual. I ran into one individual. He's a phenomenally successful investor, had been investing for a long period of time, and we'll just say he was worth more than $1 billion. And here I am looking at, you need all this structure on family offices and stuff. When I talk to him, he's the only one in his family office. He says, look, I pay cash for my houses, cars, etc. I don't have to pay attention to that. I just have to make sure we keep the insurance up. I have people will call me when I need it. I just write the check. I'm done. He kept his world simple. He had his own investment family office, but it was him. Now, as he started to complicate his life and hire some people and stuff, then he had to get beyond that. Then there's what I'll call a philanthropic family office. Maybe you've created, for instance, like the Gates, they created the Gates Foundation. What you can do is, let's say you just take all your money, I'm going to put it in a foundation, now I'm going to run my foundation. That's really a philanthropic kind of endeavor. Now it's a separate legal entity, you've got to do all the right tax things, etc. for it. But some people just create that foundation, and then they move all of their activity there. They will still have some other family office, their own stuff, but that's a big philanthropic endeavor, if you would. And you can hear, the Melinda and Gates Foundation, things like that you'll hear all the time for the really, really wealthy families when they think like that. Now, many families have a version of all of that, bring all of those types of family offices together in one, so that they can, they'll have all the reporting, they'll have the investments, they'll have maybe a private family foundation, or they'll just have a DAF that they manage, donor advised fund, and so they can do that. Then there's a thing called a multifamily office, and a multifamily office almost all has generally started with one family that successfully pulled all these kinds of elements together, and another family said, oh, by the way, can I just plug into that? And so, okay, we'll plug into that. Another family, can I plug into that? And pretty soon you have what's called a multifamily office serving disparate families, but serving all of these purposes that we talked about before. And so, like I said, there's a whole world of consultants and different ways to do multifamily offices. Some are not buried, but are part of banking or part of wealth management. They'll have multifamily offices. They'll do everything, by the way. They'll do everything from governance to to all the basics, if you would. Let's, and Joe, I hope I'm not, yes.
No, Tom, you're doing great, sir. We do have a question. So let me go ahead and, it says, it sounds like the 70% failure rate has a lot to do with the emotional journey of the family members and how they make decisions. How do you recognize and reconcile the needs of individual family members early in the process before resistance and non-productive conflict sets in? Once you recognize potential for intervention, what are the typical approaches that you take?
Well, that's a huge question. Could be a whole seminar in itself, right? But let me just answer just briefly. I mentioned, and maybe too cryptically, but how soon do you start talking with your family? How soon do you start developing the communications and the working together of the family? And I said it's never too early or never too late to start. But I will say it's better, much better to start early. And so this whole thing comes around, how do you communicate? How do you get on the same page as a family? And there are basically, some call them wealth coaches, some call them family coaches, that literally will come in and bring your family from wherever you are and set up a whole series of meetings and help you generate the communications and the understanding. And I as an example, I had one family that had six siblings and one matriarch, and she wanted her family to hold together. And she asked me, could we just do one family meeting? And basically I said, no, we won't do it one family. Well, why not? I'm offering to pay for it because here's the deal. It has to be kind of a lifestyle choice. It has to be part of your life that you do this. If you do one family meeting, it's probably, you might cause more harm than good. And so she agreed to a long-term program, a 3-year program. It was amazing to watch kids who never even hardly talked to each other, come together as a family in a business context. I mean, by the time they were done, they had an investment committee managing investments. They had the governance committee. I mean, they just literally came together. But it is a process, and it is something you want to commit to over time. I don't know if I completely answered that, but it's not easy. It's the hard work of having a family office and keeping the family together, for sure. So maybe we can come back to that at the end if that wasn't sufficient enough, Joe. But let me just finish with a couple of things. Challenges by family. This for single family offices. This transition from running your business to running the family office. It's a big transition, depending on how much wealth you have, the complexity, etc. Big transition. And I think I'm going to run out of time, so I'm not going to tell you a couple stories, but I have stories where it's been done successfully and not. Maybe I'll give you the one that was successful. He sold his business for about $100 million, had all cash, cash is in the bank, owned that business for 50 years. He asked the question the day after the close. His question was, next Friday's payday, I always get paid next Friday. How am I, who's doing my payroll next Friday? Now, he sold his business. He's not allowed to go back into the business, even open the door. All the people that were serving him on all those levels, embedded family offices, et cetera, are still in the business. So he's by himself. And so you'd say, well, is that a dumb question? He just has $100 million and they just go to the bank and take some money out. He wasn't really asking that question. He was really asking, what do I do now? How do I create a structure? And yes, we got him his pay. We set up a payroll for the next Friday. But no one thought about this up until the point that he was done with the business, because you're so busy selling the business, you're so busy running the business, you're not thinking about what happens the day after. And so that was the real question. You have so many nightmares about people who don't ask that question, who just start spending the money, and within years, that money is gone. It's amazing. For family offices, talent. Very hard to find good family office talent. If you think about it, most family offices don't want to be known, so therefore there's, it's kind of one of those industries where it's hard to know who's out there as a family office. It's kind of been known as a dead-end job, if you would, or you have to leave the family to go to a bigger family to improve your career. So finding great talent is tough, and sometimes you have to pay more for the talent in a family office than you do in a family business. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's a fact. The other is trust. It's really a tough challenge. You've built your business over time, you trust the people over time, but you also have a lot of things that go on in a family business. You have internal controls, you have people reconciling bank accounts, credit cards, all this kind of thing. So trust becomes a big issue, and that's a big challenge for families in their family offices. And it doesn't help with this statistic, and that is the last time I read this, 27% of family offices have some form of malfeasance take place. And you go, why that high? Family businesses, it's around 21%. So why is family offices higher? And I think it's because we put family in front of the family office. We don't do all the things you're supposed to do, good internal controls, good oversight, etc. And I have some nightmare stories about that if anybody wants to hear. And then finally, technology. Technology is just finally coming around to be focusing. It's a small industry. It's an arcane industry, if you would, from a standpoint. And so the technology folks have not paid close attention to it. They're starting to. There's some really cool aggregation tools for investments and stuff that came out of a family office. Actually, they created from themselves and said, "We did such a great job. Let's go help other families." So the technology can be a bit of a challenge. The final challenge I want to talk about is who's the quarterback for the family office? Well, normally you just say, well, of course, the person who created the wealth and now is going to run the family, now is basically in charge of the family office, that should be the quarterback. It's not always the case, because the challenge is you don't know what you don't know. We'll call it the patriarch or matriarch. Maybe they run their family office, run their family business. They know how to pull all those levers of power in the family business. They know who to go to for this piece of information, who's in charge of this, the controller. I mean, they just have all of this dialed in. But when you go into the family, go to a family office, have you set up the controls properly? There's a lot of cash usually running around a family office. What about these investments? Who's helping you make good decisions on these investments? One example of a failure that I know is the kids kept making investments that failed. So the parents kept coming in and bailing them out. And after selling their company for $50–60 million, after 7 years, I'm talking to the guy, and he's telling me, "Hey, I think I have to get a job. You're in your 70s. Well, he said, what happened? And so we have this discussion, and he had to downsize his lifestyle. He's a 5-star lifestyle. He had to downsize his lifestyle, buy a smaller house. He did fine, didn't have to get a job, but no one was paying attention. So he was trying to quarterback himself. He had no support whatsoever, and he ends up in a place that just doesn't work. And you need strategic thinking around your family office. You need strategic thinking around the family. With that, I might just stop, because I know I've come at you like a fire hose, and I know we have about 35–40 minutes, Joe. I don't know if we want to take a look at that flow chart and just give everybody a kind of a feel for what a 3-generation family might look like. Okay, there you go. Hopefully everybody can see that well. The idea here is this is 3 generations, and this is a family, let's call it a family that actually still manages the family business. So if you look at this, you have kind of an overall governing board. This is kind of like an ideal, and you can scale this. You may start with just pieces of this, and over time scale it. You can have all of this, but have it in a little bit different configuration. But I'm going to describe a few things that are really interesting here. One, as you can see, that you have a good model is you have a governing board, so that you have the right family members kind of overseeing everything. You have the chair of the board. Generally, that's the 1st-generation wealth creator who's doesn't want to let go of all of the control. Next generation might be managing the family office at this point. But if you look at the far left for yourself, the family business is still going on. They're still creating wealth in this model. And so, that's being managed just like they always have, except in this case, they actually have an outside CEO now running the family business for them. The far right is actually that when they went from a transition from, what are we going to do for our family office, all of the activities, the enterprise activities happen on the far right, where you might have a CFO or COO running, the alternative investments, the reporting, the bill pay, and technology, and all that kind of thing for the family. That would be right next door to the family business, except we're now in the third generation. So the heart of the family, this issue of dealing with that 80% failure rate, is right in the middle there. You can see the family development group, and that usually is run by family, but it's all about, and they use outside consultants and stuff, but that's about developing, to your point of how do you develop your family to take over and to be integral to the family. Right? And then you have the philanthropy. They're really heavy into philanthropy, so they have a whole different wing or division that deals with philanthropy. What the genius of this kind of model is, and what they've done, is they've said in the family development side, they said no child can just come into the family office or just into a family business or just into philanthropy. They have to go out, they have to get a good education, and we'll pay for all of that. They have to go out and work in a different environment outside the family completely for 5 years. Then they can come back in and choose where they want to be. And so somebody says, I'm third generation, I'm a millennial, I'm really interested in giving the money away and creating impact. Another one says, I love the family business. I've been working there since a kid. I want to develop and hopefully one day maybe run that family business. The key here, when you talk about the development of family, is if you see those yellow boxes, you want to make sure, or I guess it's the blue box, it's the governing board. You want to make sure if you're working in the business, you're not on the governing board. So a child can't be on the governing board of the business if they work in the business, but they can be on the governing board of the family foundation. And the reason you're doing that is you're giving them experience at a board level, even as they're developing and working within each of these types of industries. So that's just a couple examples. This has to be really well thought out, and in this case, I think they've done a good job. So I just kind of pulled together what I would consider ideal, although there is a family that looks exactly like this. Joe, I'll step back, and if you have any comments or you want me to expand on this, I'm happy to do that.
Tom, this was great. Thank you so much. I think a lot of people are under the false impression that you need $100 million or $500 million or $1 billion to have a family office. I think the scale can come down to, say, $10 million to help manage the family office so the funds aren't dissipated, so the wealth grows, the family's taken care of. So thanks for breaking this down into some simple thoughts around an enterprise, not the family business, but the enterprise of the family wealth. So great presentation. If you do have any more thoughts, you want to clarify a few more things, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think the scaling is really, really important, Joe. I think you bring up such a good point. Some families think they're too small, to have some of this structure. But I would submit that sometimes you need more structure when you're smaller, because you want to make sure that somebody walking away with $1 million out of 10 million, that's 10%. I mean, I think it's really important to know that you can be almost any size and have your family enterprise structure, especially when it comes to holding the family together, having real conversations around your wealth, being very inclusive with the different generations. One of the challenges, for instance, this family found is that the third generation doesn't really, for the most part, they care more about the social impact than they do necessarily about the family business or their wealth creation or even managing the investment. They don't care about all that. What they care about is, hey, I'd like to make a difference. And so they've had to adjust their thinking. They've even adjusted their thinking in the family business to start doing more socially oriented, by giving discount if they're working in housing issues or something like that. So they still want to be profitable, but they're willing to take the third generation and start incorporating how they feel about the business, how they feel about the world at large. Because if they don't, eventually what's going to happen is the family will just start separating out and the wealth will start moving out. And so, yeah, it's yeah, I think scale is important from a standpoint of where you're at, how much of complexity you create for yourself, how simple you keep it.
The matriarch of one of our great family business friends refers to the conversation with her kids as the death and taxes conversation. And she said the first time she had it, no one wanted to listen, and now they have it routinely, once a year. Here's an update on what the family has, and here's an update on the estate plan. And it's become much more routine and better accepted by the family members to have that death and taxes conversation.
Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. And by the way, that's such an important conversation, and how you do it makes a big difference. I think one of the biggest challenges I've had with families, especially Newell, is they're afraid of what it's going to do to the children, right? If they share how much wealth they have, but that's such a critical conversation over time. And again, you have to do it age appropriately. How about this as just an idea for the matriarch? If you have young children, take the philanthropy idea and use it as a developmental tool for the family to work together. For instance, if you have young children, you say, look, I'm going to give you each $100. You each have to choose where you want to give that away. So they each get $100. You get to choose. I'm going to give it to the dog center. I'm going to give it to the Girl Scouts, whatever it might be, right? And so then you give them $500, and you say, okay, the three of you have to decide together where you're going to give the $500 away. So now they get to do individually, but now they have to work together to figure that out. And you have to help them, guide them through that process. Over time, as they get older, you increase the dollars, and then you start saying, by the way, if you want money to a cause you care about, you have to get involved with that cause. And again, now you start having to interact at a level that makes sense. So there's a lot of structure and a lot of thinking around this, around these issues, and it's just so powerful when you see them come together, really.
That's a great idea, and I also think that helps set the stage for that generation to start working together as they enter the family business. They've already got a rapport, they already understand each other, and work towards a common goal. So it's a great suggestion on the younger kids getting together from a philanthropic perspective.
Yeah, I think so. The only other thing
questions from the audience?
No other questions at this time.
Tom, I think you covered everything. If you want to get in touch with Tom, please contact me and I'll send you his contact information. His trade area is not restricted to the Bay Area of California. He can meet with families anywhere at any time. So Tom, thank you so much for the great conversation today.
Joe, thank you so much, and thank you to you and Ed Hart and certainly Mike in the background. And thanks to First Bank for even including me. I truly appreciate it. And thank you.
See you soon. Thank you. Good day, everyone. Thanks for joining us.